Okay, in the back.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carolyn Kane, and I'm the chair of Boston SpedPac. Tonight, the subject matter is the young child. So we have presenter from early intervention here, and then we also have people from the Shriver Center that are going to talk about healthy eating studies for parents of students with disabilities. So that covers all age groups. We want to get started this evening, but before we do, I just want to make a couple of announcements. We have some representatives of BPS here in the room. We have June Gruner, who's here, and also Thelma Pierce. So if anybody has, and Eileen Nash, the Deputy Superintendent for Individualized Learning, is also here, and they're here to offer you the opportunity to speak with someone if you have a particular problem currently with your child's IEP or your child's educational program. I also wanted to let people know, because this is also being taped, that next month we'll be having our general elections for SpedPac, and we'll be having a resource fair which brings together a lot of different resources for parents to come and talk to people and collect information having to do with disabilities, different programs out there, different resources to really connect the parents to, we don't know what we don't know, and finding out about the information that's helpful to us is one of the things that we try to do throughout the year. So in May, we're going to have the resource fair to bring together a lot of the different organizations that offer services to parents and children with disabilities. And we'll have our general election that evening, but it will mostly be the resource fair. I actually won't be at the May meeting. I'm going to be out of the country, but I'm not up for re-election. My term is actually for another full year, lucky me. And the secretary is also not up for re-election. That's Diane Lashinskas. So it will be for vice chair, treasurer, and then the executive board. So we would encourage parents to run for election, to become part of SpedPac. We're all volunteers here. We're all parents of children with disabilities, and we need as much help as we can possibly get. We meet regularly with the district. We go to the school committee meetings and advocate for changes and improvements to special education for better outcomes for children with disabilities. So all parent involvement, if you're a parent of a child on an IEP in the Boston Public School System, you are automatically a member of SpedPac, but being on the executive board or being one of the officers is why we have elections on an annual basis. Okay, so we're going to talk about early intervention first, but I don't think you're going to do a presentation about turning 3.
No, I'm going to cover that a little bit.
Okay.
Mostly about.
So I brought with me, thank you. I brought with me this evening some materials on turning 3 that talks about the timelines when you want to refer your child to the Boston Public Schools to get that process started. If your child's in early intervention, generally they will do that process. They will make the referral, and then there's sheets over there that talk about the timelines for doing consent. There's timelines for completing evaluations, and then timelines for convening the team once the evaluations are complete to determine first whether or not the child's eligible for special education, and if they are, then to go ahead and write the IEP that will talk about the goals and services for the child in special education. So those materials are over there. I'm going to wait and see what early intervention talks about, and if I feel like there's information that I could add at the end of that, then I'm happy to do so. And then after early intervention is done, then we will hear from the Shriver Center, okay? So thank you all for coming. Oh, I'm sorry. There is a translator in Spanish if anybody needs that, and she's at the back of the room. She's translating for one now. Okay? Sorry.
All right. Do I have to stay here?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Johan Debesh, and I am Program Director at Thome Boston Metro Early Intervention. We are one of the 5 early intervention programs around the city of Boston providing services for 0 to 3-year-olds. So, before I get started, who here has heard of early intervention? Raise your hands. You heard of early intervention? Okay, great. So we've got a few. That's good. We're starting. That's part of my job is getting that out there. Does anyone have a child in early intervention right now, or has had a child in the past in early intervention? There, yes, great. So, preaching to the choir for you guys, that's great. And maybe some of the rest of you folks are saying, oh, my children are too old, they're not 0 to 3. part of this work is getting this information out there. There are so many people who have never heard of early intervention, who don't know how to get into it. So maybe you're only hearing this and you can tell your friends or that family that you know down the street that's got a younger child, so we can spread the word. So, early intervention, what is it? What is it? Really short answer, it is services for children from 0 to 3, developmental services in the home. It is free for families. As long as your child is eligible, anyone can receive early intervention services. So, services, what does that mean? That's a big word. Okay, you're right. I can't bring your groceries into the house. I can't get your doctor to make house calls. But if it's got to do with development of your child, then yes, we're probably going to be able to provide it. Speech therapy, music therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. We've got art therapists, we've got behavioral therapists, nursing services, nutritionists, we've got social workers, we've got autism spectrum disorder intensive services, providers that we work with. We've got developmental specialists. These are our sort of core folks who are educated in all the different aspects of children's development, and they keep an eye on how everything's putting itself together. So that's great, but how do you get into early intervention? So you've got a child, or your family down the street has a child and they're worried, oh, my child's not talking as much as I wish they were. I see these other children and they're talking more and my child's not talking. What do you do? So anyone, literally anyone who is involved in this child's care can refer the child and family to early intervention. We get a lot of referrals from pediatricians. We get a lot of referrals from the family themselves. You can just call us up. All of our materials are right there on the table. Call us up and say, I would like to get my child into early intervention. We get referrals from DCF. We get referrals from daycares. All of these places can call up and say, yes, we'd like to refer this family. Then what happens? All right, we've got the referral in. Give some information on the phone, then we get a team out. And that team is providers from our staff. They're all trained in working with small children. They do a simple evaluation. It's a big word, but it's okay. It's an evaluation. We come into your home. We do some play with the child. We do some interview with the parents or caregivers, whoever's there. We determine how is this child doing. And there's a few different ways that child can be eligible. Another big word, eligible, not a big thing. 4 different kinds. If this child has some low scores on our eligibility tool, it's called the Battelle, that's the playing and interviewing. If they're low on those scores, they're in. If they've got a diagnosis, we have a big list of diagnoses from the Department of Public Health, which is our lead agency. They tell us, okay, if you have any one of these diagnoses on here, you're eligible, you're in. If you've got some risk factors in the family, in the environment, in how you're growing up, that are putting your child's development at risk, then your child is eligible. And finally, if none of these are true, and some of our team are looking at the child and saying, well, these 3 ways didn't work, but there's something going on here. We need to get this child into the system. We have this great thing called clinical judgment. And we say, yes, this is how this child is going to be in. We have concerns about this area, and we're going to document this. It's a little bit of a headache for us. We've got to do more paperwork. Yeah. But it's worth it because it means we can get this child into the system, even if they didn't get in on these other 3. So, you're eligible. Great. Now what? Next thing. Your services start. That whole list of services, all those therapies, all those different kinds of providers that can come into your home. You can have one of those. You can have all of them. I've actually never seen a family who had every single one of those providers come into their home. That you probably would be too much. But you could. It would be possible. So, the You get assigned a service coordinator who deals with your family, who's there as the point person, works with the family to decide, what does this child need? What does this family need? Because that's really important. This is a family and child service. We can bring in, say, a PT like me, and have me work with that child once a week for an hour, and that's great. But if we can have me come in and work with that family and help those parents or caregivers understand how to best help this child develop better, wow, then that's like all week long, all year long. So that's huge. It's a family and child. The name of our company is Thome Child and Family Services. We work really hard to work with the family, not just the child. So that service coordinator comes in and they're working with the family to decide, all right, my child isn't communicating as much, isn't talking as much as I would hope. So we'll get a speech language pathologist in. Great. They're not walking quite as much, then let's get the physical therapist in. Their feeding skills, they're not getting their fingers into their mouth as much as we'd like, let's get the occupational therapist in. Where I need support on how to, get a new apartment. Wait, that's not for my child, but it's about the child, because if the family doesn't have the right place to live, that's going to affect the child's development. So we bring in a social worker who has those resources and the knowledge to help do that process of getting that new apartment. All of these things are early intervention. Now, this goes on, and say you started when your child was very little, maybe the child was a preemie, and we got the referral from your pediatrician, and we get out there really quick, and we've got the folks that are working with your little baby. That's great. Now, they're a little bit older, and yeah, they're working on their social skills, they're working on their communication skills. That's great. And also we want that child to be working on those skills with other children, because you can talk to an adult as much as you want. When you're a kid, it doesn't help as much as talking with other kids, as interacting with other kids. So what do? We get them into the center. We have a big, beautiful place on Amory Street in JP. We've got 6 different size and configuration rooms where we have toddler groups, we have parent-child groups, we have specialized groups for, say, these children are working on their speech skills, these children are working on some motor skills, these children are on the autism spectrum. We've got groups for all of those different things. So your child's 18 months, we get them into the group. And it's kind of like daycare, but it's very constrained. It's maybe 2 hours at a time. We'll get you transportation if you need it. Again, no charge to the family. It's all included. And we get your child in there and we get them working with the other kids. And we see it every time. The change between just being at home and just being with that family to interacting with those kids, it's huge. It makes a huge difference. So, wow, 18 months, get them into the group, we're working, we're doing great stuff, we can see that child developing, it's wonderful. They're getting a little bit older, and okay, we're starting to think about what's next. At the beginning I said, yeah, 0 to 3. As much as we would like to, we can't work with the children and families after 3. And I'm not kidding at all when I tell you, I get some of my staff members, they came in, that child just turned 3, they had their last visit with the child and family, and they're tearing up. They're sad because they so enjoyed working with the family. They're so devoted to working with these kids. So, 3's coming, we can see it coming, and what are we going to do next? This is not just oh boy, you're 3, now we've got to figure out what's next. We start working at the very beginning. Whenever you are working with early intervention, your staff is thinking ahead. what's after early intervention? What's coming next? There's a lot of different options. There's Boston Public Schools, there's preschool, there's community programs. We're talking about Boston SpedPac, so probably we're looking at Boston Public Schools for the children of your children and maybe your friends. So what do? As I said, right at the beginning, we're starting to think ahead. When do we need to start to get this child into the Boston Public School system? We're having discussions throughout the time. Every 6 months we have another reevaluation, reassessment. How's things going? How are we doing on those goals that we set up at the beginning? How is your child still eligible? Or, wow, did they make such great progress? Because every year we have to do that. We have to say, all right, is this child still eligible? Okay. They're doing so well. We see it often. We have kids who get out of our program because they do so well, they make so many gains that they're done. But other children don't, and that's great. We keep working with them. Minimum 2.5, we start the formal process with Boston Public Schools. There's a very specific set of guidelines that they have to follow and we have to follow. It's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of specifics, and the thing is that we're there with you. We know the system. Our providers know how it works. They know the different steps. And so as you're beginning to go through that process, we're walking with you through that process. We're reminding you, hey, that batch of paperwork, that's coming up. We got to get that in so that we can start that process. And remember that next meeting that you scheduled with the BPS folks, that's coming up. I'll come to it if you want to, but we got to go to that meeting so we can start that process. Not everyone who applies to the Boston Public School system as a 3-year-old, not everyone gets in. They have their criteria as to how different children are eligible. Different children get different levels of services. Some get a classroom that's full-time, some get individual services, some don't qualify. And that's a process of, as I said, paperwork. As I said, there's an evaluation. Definitely you'll have an early intervention provider there at the evaluation. So where this, say, occupational therapist is meeting your child for the first time, but we've got the early intervention occupational therapist who's worked with your child maybe for years. So the OT can ask the other OT, well, so what I'm seeing today, is that a good representation of this child's skills? Is that what you see at home when you go into that house every week, every other week? And so we can use this maybe years-long experience of these EI providers to inform this whole Boston Public Schools entry process. So we get you into that process, we walk you through that process. The end of the process for us is the individualized education program meeting, where all of those evaluations from the Boston Public Schools get put together, they get synthesized into a whole plan for your child, figuring out what's the best placement, what's the best services, what's the best way to move forward. And again, we're there with you. We've been working with you maybe for years. We're able to say, hey, don't forget that we tried this strategy about this child's sensory needs, and it worked really well. Hey, we can put that on the IEP. We can say, we have tried this kind of attention strategy, let's put that on the IEP. We're providing the experience of all of this time that we've worked with you into the IEP development process. It's a lot of change for families. The early intervention model is very different from the Boston Public Schools model, from the public schools model in general. It's not better, it's not worse. It's two fundamentally different federal mandates. How everybody's qualified is very different. But when you have early intervention there with you, it makes a huge difference in families' ability to advocate, to help their children. So we have the IEP meeting, we say our goodbyes, and then that staff member comes into my office and cries. So our goal as early intervention providers, we want early intervention children to leave with better developmental skills than they came in with, than they might have had if we hadn't been in there. And also, really importantly, as I said, we want the families to leave early intervention knowing more about how to help their child, being more experienced helping their child, better able to advocate for their children as they take the next steps, be it Boston Public Schools, be it waiting until kindergarten, whatever those next steps are. So, that's my quick wrap-up of what early intervention is. I hope that if you have children of your own that are 0 to 3, that you'll ask me questions, or if you don't have, it's not your children you're thinking of, but you have some other child, please let them know about early intervention. Ask them, have you heard about an early intervention? Are you in early intervention? Do you have one of those programs? Because it really is as easy as just giving us a call. Us or one of the other four other programs that are in the Boston area. You can talk to your pediatrician, they can talk to their pediatrician, if it's another family, and we want to help your family, we want to help those families that you know of to get these supports that we know make a huge difference. Because when we get in at this early age, it's a huge help for all of these families. So, does anyone have any questions about early intervention, about transitions into Boston Public Schools, child development?
Could you explain a little bit more about what your intensive ASD services are?
Sure. So, autism spectrum disorders, as you probably know, all of the research is very clear. The earlier we get the services, the earlier we get really intensive, 10, 20, 30 hours a week, those kinds of services, the better these children do. It makes a huge difference in how these children progress and develop. So the services that we work with are places like Beacon, like Building Blocks. These are separate companies that provide the different strategies. There's a variety of different ways that strategies that people use to provide those 10, 20, 30 hours of services a week. And their services are completely integrated with ours. When a family and a service coordinator work together and say, all right, well, this child has a diagnosis of autism, then what's the next step? We need to get one of these intensive service providers in. We give them a call. We provide the variety of choices because it's, again, all of this is family choice. The family makes the contact, then the people from that service agency, they come in and they have a meeting with the family and with our providers. Because again, these providers know this child and family. So they're part of the goals and the plan that we're making. So we say, all right, we're going to get these folks in, and they're going to help with this goal that we're working on, and this goal that we're working on, and this goal. And we're going to talk with them and say, hey, what are you working on? Because maybe I can integrate that into what I'm working on. And hey, also, by the way, this thing that I just tried worked really well, so you can use that in your services. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. And please, when we're all done, feel free to come and speak with me. There's pamphlets and materials over on the table. And if you have any more questions afterwards, you can also look up our website thomchild.org, and I hope that I will see you and your children in our center. We'll have our clinicians coming out to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with regard to the information that I left on the table, if anybody needs a copy, a lot of the information that pertains to children who are turning 3 also pertains to children regardless of their age in BPS, and that has to do with the evaluation process and the team meeting process. So, you know, when you're turning 3 and you're entering the system, you want to start at 2.5 years of age, and what that really is to do is that you want to have your child evaluated, you want to convene with the team to discuss those evaluations, and then develop an IEP if your child's eligible, and doing it when they're 2.5 years old and starting the process then. That leaves room, if there's not an agreement about the IEP or about your child's placement, that there's time to work it out before your child actually turns 3. Because at 3 years of age, if you have early intervention services, they immediately stop on the day that your child turns 3. I mean, it's actually a pretty unsympathetic process, frankly, where you're getting services and people are coming to your home, or you're going to the center for, you know, sort of play group and things of that nature, and as soon as your child turns 3, you're cut off, and that's by federal law. It's not by the early intervention, you know, providers deciding that. It's just the way that the law works. So you want to start the process of special education early enough so that if things don't go smoothly and there is a dispute to be worked out or some type of a disagreement, then you have extra time before your child actually turns 3, and you still have early intervention in your life. And if you have early intervention, they will generally come to your team meeting. You need to invite them there, and they'll also generally give you evaluations when your child's aging out of early intervention, and those can be submitted to the school district as well. So then when you do get the referral to the school district, and this applies to children turning 3, but it also applies to all children if they're being referred at another age, you know, coming into special education, or if your child's already in BPS and you start to suspect that there's something going on with your child, that they're not performing at the age and grade level. Maybe they have a learning disability, they're having some behavior issues that have come up, maybe they're not socially interacting with their peers, you want to ask the district to evaluate your child. The district is required by law to go out and find children and identify children in the school system, and even children who are not in the school system yet, who may need to be evaluated. But you can make a referral to the school district, your pediatrician can make a referral to the school district, early intervention can make anybody can. But when you make the referral, you want to make sure that you follow up in writing, because we're talking about timelines that are starting. So from the date that you make the referral, within 5 days, the district is supposed to send you a consent form on the evaluations that they're going to do for your child. So it may be a psychological exam, it should be an academic evaluation, whether or not your child has social issues, behavior issues, maybe you need an ABA assessment, you know, OT, PT, speech, music therapy, any of those things. The district has the ability to do all of those. If your child has hearing or vision impairments, then you want to have them assessed in that area as well. Orientation and mobility, so even if your child is not completely blind but has a visual impairment, orientation and mobility will help them to figure out how to get around the school throughout their day. So once you sign that consent form, you give it back to the district. They have 30 school days to then complete those evaluations. That doesn't include school vacations, it doesn't include holidays, and it doesn't include weekends. So what you want to do is from the date that you sign it and return it, you can't do it, you know, you can't sign it and then not return it and claim that they should have started then. You want to knock off on your calendar and count the number of days, school days, you know, 30. When you get to 30, you want to circle that date, and if the district has not, you know, contacted you, first of all, you want to do it ahead of time if they haven't even contacted you to set up the evaluations. You know, if you get to 15 school days and nobody set up evaluations, you want to call them back and say, when are we scheduling these evaluations? But they're supposed to be completed within 30 school days. That means all done and ready to go. And then 15 more school days in addition to the 30, which is a total of 45 school days. The district needs to convene the team and discuss those assessments. So they'll talk about eligibility. First of all, to be eligible for special education, you need to have a disability, right? And there's autism, there's a learning disability, there's You know, your child can have a physical impairment, they can have an emotional impairment, maybe they don't do well in, you know, sort of a big school building and they're very shy and reserved. Whatever the issue is, you have to have not only have a disability, but it has to be because of that disability, you need special education services or one or more related services. Now the related services are OT, speech, PT, ABA, behavioral services, orientation and mobility, vision services, any of those things, hearing services. Maybe they need, you know, specific things related to their hearing. And Boston actually does have a specialized school for the deaf, which is the Horace Mann School. So you want to keep track of your timelines, and you should have a team meeting scheduled within 45 school days of the time that you signed that evaluation consent form. So that's important for parents turning 3 because they've never gone through it before, but it also includes parents that children are coming into special education after they entered the school system, and it happens to every parent whose child is already on an IEP every 3 years. Because by law, the district is required every 3 years to do a complete reevaluation. And they go through the process of redetermining eligibility and then what services the child needs if they have a disability. So those are the 2 things that you want to understand. And then with regard to what happens. So the team meeting, I want to back up for a second. When you get your consent form, it's better to write on the consent form just so you don't have to do another writing. I'm requesting copies of all evaluations at least 2 days in advance of your team meeting. Now, I'm saying at least 2 days in advance. I would want them a lot sooner, but the law actually only requires the district to give you the evaluations 2 days in advance of the team meeting. But 2 days is better than none, and it gives you an opportunity to go through the evaluations, to identify things that you don't understand, to identify things that you don't agree with, and to identify where you have questions. You don't want to be at a team meeting and having people hand you a bunch of reports and you're trying to listen to what they're saying to you and read the reports at the same time. You want to give yourself that little bit of time that the law does to go over that information so that you're better prepared going into the team meeting. Okay? Then, if the team finds your child eligible and they write the IEP, what you want to know is that at the end of the team meeting, they're not going to give you an IEP, but they're going to give you a team summary sheet. And you want to check that team summary sheet to make sure that it reflects, it's not a complete IEP, but it's supposed to talk about the goal areas and what was agreed upon for services. Was it agreed that my child's going to get 3 times PT a week, 1 time OT, 2 times speech, or 10 hours of ABA services? Whatever was agreed to, you want to make sure that they reflect it in writing and they give it to you before you leave. Because it's not unheard of that the team meets and they agree on things, and then when you get the IEP, it doesn't reflect what was discussed at the team meeting. So the team meeting summary sheet is a record of what happened at that team meeting. So you're entitled to get one and ask for one. You don't want to leave the meeting without it and just having to rely on your own notes. The district writes the team summary sheet. So before you leave, make sure it's accurate. If it's not accurate, tell the SPED coordinator that they need to make corrections. You want a copy of that, and then when you get your child's IEP, you can check it not only with your notes, but with that team summary sheet. And if it's not accurate, you want to go back to the SPED coordinator and say, the IEP needs to be revised or corrected because it doesn't reflect what we agreed to at the team meeting. So you get your IEP, and let's say it matches your team meeting summary sheet. You have to respond to the district. You either accept it, you reject it, or you accept it in part and reject it in part. Those 2 things go together, because when you're doing it in part, I'm half taking, I'm half, you're taking some, but not all of it. Now, you have 30 calendar days. The district works on school days, but when it comes to parents and requirements on parents, that's calendar days. So you have 30 days to decide what you're going to do. If you're confused, you can reach out to SpedPac, you can reach out to other parents in your community. But what I'll say is this, is if your child's coming into Boston for the first time and they've been found eligible for an IEP, do not reject the entire IEP. If you reject your child's entire IEP, you're not going to get any services when your child turns 3. Early intervention is gone, and here you are, you're in a fight and you rejected it. The district's position is going to be, well, we offered to service their child and they rejected it. It must be something in the IEP that you can accept, whether it's the amount of services, but you're not happy with the way the goal's written, or they didn't give you enough services, what you say is, I accept, you know, two times 30 minutes a week for physical therapy. I reject because I reject the fact that you did not give me 4 times a week of physical therapy, which is what I was asking for, which my doctor recommended for my daughter. So if you have any outside evaluations that you've had done for your daughter, because a lot of parents do, those are also things you want to submit to the district in advance. You want to let them know about it if they've been done before the district does their testing, before they do that, because a lot of testing cannot be repeated within a 1-year time period, and you don't want testing to be invalidated because you didn't let them know that you had your own testing done. And again, this is important for people entering the system, but the same applies to parents that are already in the system and already have children with IEPs. The only difference about rejecting it, the whole thing, is that if you have a child already on an IEP and you reject the whole one that they just issued you after the 3-year reeval, your child falls back to the previous IEP. But even the previous IEP, you would expect that their old goals, there's something in that new IEP that they issue to you that should be acceptable. You know, whether it's the parent concerns in the vision statement and the accommodations and the modifications, there's got to be something in there that you discussed with the team that you reached an agreement on. So you can, that's the, I accept in part, I reject in part, and what you do is you have to list out the things that you reject. Because if you don't reject it, it's assumed that it's accepted, okay? So the rejecting the whole one is generally not the way to go. It's definitely not the way to go if your child's turning 3 and this is their very first IEP. But the accepting in full, now that's great. That means that everybody got it right, the team summary sheet matches what was said at the meeting, and you're getting everything that you feel that is appropriate to meet your child's needs. So you have to do that within 30 calendar days. Part of what the meeting's going to talk about is placement. And again, this is more critical for kids entering the system because it's going to decide the type of placement, meaning substantially separate in with only other children on IEPs, partial inclusion, meaning they spend part of the day in the regular classroom and part of the day being pulled out specific services, or inclusion, full inclusion, which is 80% or more of the day in the general education classroom with typical peers. Now that doesn't mean that services can't come into your child in that classroom, and it also doesn't mean that your child can't be pulled out for any reason. So those are the types of placements when it's in district. The other thing is the location. Placement has to do with the type of placement, but also the location. There's specific case law on that, so parents have input into what school their child's going to, not just the type of placement. Some of that's going to depend on availability in BPS. You can't demand a placement because you want a specific school, but there's no seats available. It's sort of, you know, we're not in the lottery, but they don't have to create a seat for us that doesn't exist. You have an equal opportunity to have that seat as much as any other SPED parent, but when the seats are gone, that is an issue, and that's not really them denying you an appropriate placement. That's finding a different appropriate placement within the district that meets your child's needs, that can provide everything in the IEP, but it may not be the #1 choice that you had. So, and that's, being an inclusion is what they call the least restrictive environment, and the law requires that every child be in the least restrictive environment, meaning being educated with their typical peers in the general education classroom to the maximum extent appropriate, meaning as much as possible, unless the team decides that the child's needs are so significant that it's not possible to bring, you know, for them to be educated appropriately in an integrated setting. So it's a team decision. The parents are an important member of that team. You can bring anybody to the team meeting that you want. You know, if you're going by yourself, you might want to bring a friend. If your significant other or your spouse is not available, bring a good note taker. Everybody has a friend that can take good notes. And believe me, when you go in, especially for your first meeting, and you have, you know, 8 people from the district and you, it's good to have a buddy there so you feel more comfortable. It's good to have regular reports in advance so that you're ready to talk and discuss what the issues are. But it's also good to have somebody there that can be taking notes so that you can interact with the team and you don't have to worry about whether or not you wrote everything down. The team meeting summary sheet, again, is going to be limited to goal areas and services, but you want to have a transcript, you know, as much as possible of your own notes so that it can refresh your memory if issues come up. So that's a little brief overview of the law. Again, we'll put these materials on our website, and bostonspedpac.org, which John created and manages for us. It has other materials in the library section about basic rights, about transition. So if your child's 14 to 22, you want to look at the transition handouts. If your child's, just in special education and, anywhere from 3 to 22, the basic rights applies, the IEP basics applies, and that information is there for people to view 24 hours a day. So with that, I'm going to introduce the Shriver Center to give their presentation. We'll still be available to answer any questions, and again, if people have specific issues that they need addressed by BPS, we have forms over here that you can fill out, and we will facilitate the communication with BPS, and someone will be contacting you to resolve your child's issues. Okay? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. That was a great presentation, both of them actually. My name is Elaine Gavvish, and I'm family faculty is what my title is at the Eunice Kennedy Shriver Center. We're part of UMass Medical School, and I'm here with Lucy Lauren, who's going to speak with you in a few minutes too. And Lucy is a research associate at the Shriver Center, and we're going to talk about three main areas. We're going to talk about, what is the Shriver Center, what is it that we do there overall. We'll give you a little background on the kind of work. But then Lucy's going to talk with you just a little bit about a couple of studies that we're recruiting participants for that have to do with health promotion, and she'll describe those in a few minutes. And then the last piece is back to your original theme about the young child, and that's where I'll come back again and talk about the Massachusetts Act Early campaign and information about healthy development, developmental milestones, and the importance of tracking those, and then what if you have a concern about a child's development. So those are the three areas that we're going to talk about, all right? Okay, so first of all, for about 40 years, the Eunice Kennedy Shriver Center was located in Waltham, Massachusetts. And just this past November, we moved. And now we're not too far away. We're in Charlestown. We're right off of the Sullivan Station line there, and there's a shuttle bus that actually takes people over to the Shriver Center. So I want to let you know that we're accessible, we're close by, and you'll see why in a few minutes when I start to describe to you a little bit about what we do. There may be times where it might be of interest to you. Also, if you're looking for more information, we've brought all sorts of materials that are sitting there on the table on your way out, so please feel free to take any of our flyers or pamphlets, anything that we refer to tonight. Chances are they'll be on the table over there. So here's our location in Charlestown, and then we also have a second location in Worcester because we're part of UMass Medical School. So, so our history, I mentioned that we've been doing what we do for about 40 years now. Does anyone know who Eunice Kennedy Shriver was? Does anyone know? She was the sister of Ted Kennedy, and that's Rose Kennedy, their mother, in the background there. And that's where the old building was in Waltham when it first got started back in 1969. But the story is that Eunice Kennedy Shriver was the sister of a sibling who had a developmental disability. She had an intellectual disability, and it was because of her sibling, her sister Kathleen, that really, I think, inspired her to be a real champion for people with disabilities. And so she decided back then that it wasn't just enough to have a family member. She was a rich, privileged person, and nobody back then talked about intellectual disabilities. Nobody back then talked about mental retardation or any of those things. But Eunice Kennedy Shriver decided that she could do it. And because she had the means in life to do it, she actually opened the door for all the rest of us, because of her courage. And so what she did is she said, no children should be kept in the dark. No children should be, not part of our greater society. And so she modeled that for everybody. So she started Special Olympics, and she started all of these research institutes in the country. One of them was ours, and we were one of the first ones to open. And so these research institutes looked at children mostly, and in some cases adults with intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, autism spectrum disorders, all of these different brain-based disabilities, and tried to learn, how do these children learn? How can we help them learn better? What kind of things can we do to make life better for children with these particular disabilities and their family members? And God bless her, for starting the Shriver Center, we've been doing this now with her, you know, that she kicked it off and got it started, but there are, I think, 16 of these across the country right now doing this work, and it's all because of one woman having the vision to see this through. So I just kind of wanted to give you a little history about how we even got started. And so our mission is, every organization, you got to have a mission statement in order to know what it is that you're shooting for, you know. And so our mission statement is that we are hoping to advance things that are local, national, and even international in our efforts to improve quality of life for people with intellectual disabilities, developmental delays, and their families. Really important. Families have got to be part of this, because we all live in families, and our families are the ones that help our children and our family members who have disabilities. So we include them in everything that we think about and do. So what we're doing there is we're conducting research. We're conducting basic research, and then applied research means that you take what you found out in your research and you apply it in research on how does it work in practice. How does somebody actually do this work? And then we also provide education, training, and service, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. So just as an overview, there's 3 big centers that are all within the Shriver Center. One is called the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center, and we're one of 15 in the country. It was just what I described a minute ago, what Eunice Kennedy Shriver founded, but basically it's a center where we're doing a lot of studies, a lot of things are going on and I'll describe some of those in a minute. We also have a University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, which is more about training and services. And then the last piece is that we have a leadership education training program there too, so that we're training our next generation of disability leaders in the state to understand what children, what families need in a leadership program, and we actually go out and make changes, positive changes. So these 3 programs together make up what we call a full-feature disability research center and developmental disability center. So as part of that, you think about a 3-legged stool, right? And if you take one of the legs away, the stool falls over. So in this case, what we're looking at is, first we've got research on one side of that stool, so that helps us learn about how people learn, what people need. But then we have training, so based on what we learn in the research, we then go out and train people so that we can make changes in terms of how people do their work. And then the third part of it is the services, and there are a couple of services that we offer there I'll tell you about in a minute. But then again, that's based on our research. Wow, what can we do to help people? And so those are the 3 legs of the stool. So basically, our research part focuses on things like autism, brain-based disabilities, neurodevelopmental disorders, things like Down syndrome, things like intellectual disabilities, attention deficit disorder, and we're looking at things like behavioral analysis. I think you heard about that a little bit earlier. How do we influence behavior by treating it? How do we study what works in terms of how we study behavior and then how we intervene? Things like behavioral and cognitive neuroscience, so brain sciences, computer sciences, developmental and cognitive psychology, neuropsychology, all brain-based things, and then lastly, nutrition. Some of the current projects that we've got going on right now are that we're learning about how children make requests verbally if they have a cognitive disability, or how do they communicate non-verbally through their faces or through their emotions, through facial expression, through their body language. And thinking about those things, if we learn about that, then maybe we can come up with interventions that can help in those areas. And then we research learning, attention, and how children with disabilities are motivated. And then what we do with that information is we develop teaching strategies, and we then share that with teachers and educators. We study it, what works. We're not wasting our time in terms of saying, we're going to look at all sorts of things, come up with a teaching curriculum, and then just base it on anything we think might happen. No. We're looking at lots of kids. We're looking at how things work. We're looking at when are they learning, how are they learning, and we're using that information to create new teaching strategies for children and with disabilities. And we also have information technology to help with learning and communication for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So things like communication boards, assistive technology. We're studying these things and we're creating new ways for children to communicate. We're also looking at healthy lifestyles through nutrition and physical activity. So as an example of that, we might have a program where we teach youth with intellectual disabilities about how do what goes into a good diet, and we help them set menus for themselves. We help them learn about how to take care of themselves, how to take care of their nutrition. And then we think about things like, well, what about physical activity? How much do you need? How do you know how to monitor your physical activity? How do you set goals for yourself? And so based on that, we'll then study it. So that's where the research comes in to see what worked about any of that. So those are some of the main research projects we've got going on. We also have this really nice, if you're looking for, so this is our service piece. So we have something called New England Index, and it's an online database. If you're looking for example, anyone that's providing information regarding programs, agencies, doctors, dentists, and consultants in Massachusetts who help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and children and their families, you can go to this database, and let's say that you're looking for somebody who's a neuropsychologist in Greater Boston who speaks Haitian Creole or something like that. You punch in those words and you're going to find a doctor, okay, hopefully. Or you might find a list of doctors to choose from. Or if you're looking for somebody who is a dentist and works with adults who have intellectual disabilities, and there aren't a lot of those, we have those on our list. So you can go in to New England Index, and we have information on the table. So on the way out, pick up a sheet if you want for New England Index. It will help you find things. The other thing that we have is something called the Autism Insurance Resource Center. So just by show of hands, anyone has a family member who has autism spectrum disorders? Okay, great. I do. I have an 18-year-old that's on the spectrum. And so the Autism Insurance Resource Center is fantastic because what it has done is, in 2010, there was a law that was passed that, if you had Mass Health, if you had Medicaid, if you had any of those services, that actually not Mass Health, I'm sorry, if you had private insurance, Mass Health is working on it, but they don't have it yet. But if you had private insurance, you had to have things like ABA covered, speech therapy, occupational therapy, a lot of the services, for a child with an autism spectrum disorder. So the Autism Insurance Resource Center is a great place because they can help you figure out how does the law work, does it apply to my family, how do I ask my employer to help if I have private insurance, how do I get these things for my family members. So again, and the woman who wrote the law is the person that runs the Autism Insurance Resource Center. So, she knows everything about it, so give a call. Okay. And then there's my part I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes called the Massachusetts Act Early campaign. And I'm the state team leader for this national campaign. Have you heard of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC? So that's a public health organization, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to get out the word about healthy development, and also when there are concerns about development, how do we help families get what they need for their children? If they need a diagnosis, if they need services, what do we do? How do we educate families about development overall? And that's what Massachusetts Act Early does. Then we also have, as I mentioned, education and training at the Shriver Center, and so I'm part of the faculty on this training program, and I was a student in this program as well, so it's called LEND, and it stands for Leadership, Education, in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities. There's a flyer about this program on the table out there, but what this is that we, every year, have about 10 students come through our program who are graduate level students. Now they might be a doctor, they might be a lawyer, they might run a program for families, they might be a PAC chair, they might be somebody who has had some sort of leadership in their background and they want to learn more about it. The LEND program is a great way to have that happen. And what we do is that, let's say we have somebody come to us with a master's degree or higher. They can come for 1 day a week in our program, and their education, we will pay them for coming. And this is a federal program, so it comes out of maternal and child health. And basically what it says is that we will pay 1 day a week for somebody who has a master's level or a doctorate or an MD to come into our program so that we can train them about how to make the world a better place for people with disabilities and their families. If they have a bachelor's degree or higher, we require that they get their master's in public administration through Suffolk University. So we've got a partnership with Suffolk. And let's say that you you know, have your bachelor's degree and you want to come to us, your education through Suffolk, most of it would be paid for to get your master's degree. So it's a really generous program. It's a wonderful program. I have to tell you, I love being a student there, and certainly I love teaching in the program as well. And the things I teach about are what you offer, what families and children with disabilities. I talk all about that. I teach a class called the Family and Community Perspective, and that's all we do is talk about really understanding what people with disabilities and their families need. So that's the LEND program. And we also have some online distance learning programs. Online, the one thing for parents to know about is something called Discovering Behavioral Intervention. It's this online course about ABA. So if you had a child with an autism spectrum disorder and you wanted to learn about how ABA works, this is a course you could take online that would help with that. And we also offer it to people that work with young children, paraprofessionals, instructional assistants, and others. And we're getting ready to launch a dentistry program for dentists, how to work with people with disabilities through an online program. So we're doing, this all comes out of our research and the work that we do. We also have a newsletter. It's free, it's online, comes out twice a year, and you can subscribe at our website. And it is based on a theme, but you know, so every issue, the next theme is going to be about our online distance learning programs, for example. But you can go to the Shriver Center website. It's at, because we're part of UMass Medical School, it's www.umassmed.edu/Shriver, and you can learn about all the studies and the things I just told you about, but also you can get a copy of our newsletter. And this is, again, more information about our website, a phone number, and that's our staff. That was at the old place right before we moved. But anyhow, that's the Shriver Center staff, and we're happy to be here in the Boston area now working in this community. And I'll have Lucy come up and tell you a little bit about a couple of her health promotion studies.
Hi, I'm Lucy, and I'm here to talk. Elaine mentioned research, and we do different kinds of research. We have studies that are basic, where we're just trying to learn things, and then studies where we take it and we create programs. And we're right at the beginning with the Children's Mealtime Study at trying to figure out what goes on in the home, at the table, with children with intellectual disabilities. And the idea behind that is so that ultimately we can create programs that will help families promote healthy eating in children who have intellectual disabilities who are very young. We all know the importance of healthy eating and nutrition, and this study is looking at sort of how the child is behaving, how the child's behaving is influencing the parents, how the parents are influencing the child, what the child is actually eating. And it's a series of, it's called an observational study, so it's a series of surveys that we ask parents to self-report and tell us kind of what's going on. And we also ask typically developing children so that we can have some kind of comparison and learn what's the same and what's different. So this is the preliminary part, and it's really important to get people involved to help us learn about those things. The next thing is that we hope after we learn that we can say, okay, let's create a program that addresses the issues that we've learned about. So let's say we learn that, you know, that children's behavior is really erratic. How do, for most people with children with intellectual disabilities, how do we help structure programs that will help children with intellectual disabilities as opposed to just mainstream, typically developing children? If you were to be involved in this study, it would involve a 2 or 3 hour visit. During that visit, you would be weighed and measured. If your child, we would screen you before you came to the visit, and if we thought that the child might have an intellectual disability or a developmental delay, we would give the child a cognitive assessment to make sure that they met our criteria. And then we would also ask you some developmental questions about your child, and that's to figure out whether they meet our criteria. Then we would weigh and measure the child and the parent, and we would then give the person a number of different questionnaires about mealtime behavior, feeding practices, what the eating preferences are, what the child is doing for physical activity, and that's all so that we can figure out how those things are related through data analysis. After the visit, you would be asked to keep a 3-day food diary, and you would be trained how to do that. It sounds like pretty basic, but basically we need a lot of detail so that we know we can compare one person's eating to another person's eating. So we would show you how to measure your food, we would show you how to write it down, we would give you a lot of information about that. And then we would also ask the other parent in the household to tell us what their food preferences are as well. We are available. You can set up meetings anytime, daytime, afternoon, evenings, and weekends. And we have different locations. We can come into your neighborhood and do it in a local library. We can also do it in Charlestown, as Elaine said, at the Schraff Center. Or you can go out all the way to Worcester if you want to. For being involved in that, we have $85 compensation, $45 for the visit, and then $40 for the food diary. And then your child will also receive $15. It's all in gift cards that we give it, and we like to give you a choice of whatever kind of gift card you would like. If you come to the visit and your child doesn't meet our criteria, we give $20 for your time, and so it's not a complete loss. And I just wanted to say the person who is leading the study is somebody named Linda Bandini, who's been doing research on physical activity and nutrition, and a lot of research with children and adolescents with intellectual disabilities over the past 25 years. She's a professor at the Shriver Center and also a nutrition professor at Boston University. So that's one. And then that's the study that we have for young children, for 3 to 8-year-olds. And the other exciting study we have, which isn't quite appropriate, but I just wanted to mention because it will give you an idea of the types of things that we develop afterward, is a study called Health U. And that is a study where we've already done the basic research, and it's an applied study. And it's actually a weight loss program to look at how we can help adolescents who are 15 to 22 years old effectively lose weight. And it has nutrition education that is tailored to people with intellectual disabilities, nutrition counseling where both the family and the adolescent are involved in individual counseling, and work with a life coach, behavioral psychologist to help the adolescent integrate changes into their lives. And that's over 6 months that people get to work together. It's a nice group dynamic for the adolescent. They work as a group sometimes, and the parents are with them sometimes. So hopefully we'll get the information from that, and then that program can be disseminated if it turns out to be successful. So that's the type of direction that we would take the children's mealtime study in after we have the data. So thank you.
You know, and you can see, the studies that we have change from time to time. So you've just heard about 2 that have to do with healthy nutrition. But if you go to the website, you'll see other studies that might be running at any given time. And if it might be of interest to you or your family member, usually these studies are, we learn a whole lot, I have to say. And then what we can do is then develop things that can be helpful in the future. But as I said, if you participate in these studies, there is always some way that we will compensate you for your time, for the knowledge that we gain by working with you and your family. So, yes, sure.
Question.
Yes.
So you study for the Health U for 15 to 22. So does that focus at all on talking about like when kids transition to 22, adulthood, and maybe like learning practices for keeping healthy?
Right. So I think the idea is we don't actually work with people who are over 22 in this particular research.
Right.
But the idea is, I think, in working with the psychologist, that you actually figure out with the parents how to implement things in the home, because it's going on in the home, how to implement things in the home so that it will make a significant change in the behavior, and there will be a carryover to when the adolescent is moved out of the home and is in another environment. So that's I believe that's the hope in the way that the program is structured.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sure, and just to expand on that for a second, so that's one study, and we've done other studies that have been like that in the past. So I just want to talk about one past study so you get an idea of some of the things that might happen in the future looking at the past. So one study that we did was called Supporting Physical Activity and Recreation in the Community. It's called SPARC. And it was a study where we had teens and their families who had autism spectrum disorders go to 2 local Ys, and they were part of a club at the Y. And they'd meet up with other kids that were on the spectrum, just like they were, and they would learn how to use a track in the gymnasium. They'd learn how to use the treadmill. They'd learn how to dress for the weather if they're going to go out walking. They'd learn all sorts of healthy behaviors, and we had to create the curriculum to train them, but we also had to test it to make sure, is it working? Are they learning this, you know? So it's all those things that are going on, and it ended a couple of years ago, but it was a really exciting study. And the one other thing about it that was really, really cool is that the research team, I was a member of the team as a family member, okay? And then we recruited other family members from the community to be on the team too, so that it wasn't just all these researchers in the ivory tower saying, this is what we think is going to happen. It was families saying, this is what works. This is what works for our family, and this is what we think, you know, our advice would be to you if you're going to do this study. So then we were able to really take a very good educated approach because of how the community told us what they needed and what was important. And that's how we do our work. So I guess that's one example, but, and you know, the studies that Lucy was telling you about, that's what we have going on currently. But as I said, keep an eye on the website because things are happening, changing as we get new grants and new funding and new studies. So again, we've got some really nice people that work there. Anyhow, okay, so the next part of the presentation is actually the main part, and that's me talking about a campaign that I'm a state team chairperson for. It's called Learn the Signs, Act Early, and in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Act Early campaign. And so this is really for the youngest children, so I just want to say that up front. I want you to know what I'm about to talk about. But anyhow, it starts with my story, though, so I want to explain why. So I mentioned I'm a parent of an 18-year-old son. He has an autism spectrum disorder, and I can so very much appreciate the earlier presentation about early intervention because we are to this day so grateful to early intervention for the things that they did for my son. And then also what you heard about regarding special education and the importance of being a PAC member. I'm a PAC member right now still for my 18-year-old son. And this is his whole life in front of us here, and it really matters that we act early with our young children. If there's a problem, if there's a concern, the earlier that we get going, the better the outcome, I can tell you. And you know, and we don't know, every child is different, but we have to start with the child and with the family, and I think that's what I really love about early intervention the best, is that it's a family-centered intervention that everybody that's supporting that child is supported too. So I guess I want to just kind of make my pitch for early intervention early, and just also say that, you know, my story is that somewhere around 15 months old, my son was not progressing and actually was starting to regress a little bit. And at that time, I was a first-time parent. I, you know, didn't know anything about anything. You know, I didn't know any. I mean, look at me today. I don't know. I'm doing this work because it's so important. But I didn't know anything about development back then. I didn't know anything about, you know, as I said, it was my first time. And I remember there was a woman I knew who had 2 kids who were really, really smart kids, and they were doing really great. And my guy was not starting to talk on time. And she said to me, you know, if it were my kid, I'd watch him right down at the pediatrician's office. I was like, what? Whoa. You know, I couldn't believe that she said that to me. But actually, in the end, it was probably one of the best things, even though it wasn't, you know, she didn't do it smoothly, it wasn't done, you know, nicely, and it was kind of shocking to me, but it was the thing that got me going. And I went, all right, I'm going to show her, my kid's doing great. And I went down to the early, you know, to early intervention, actually. I self-referred to early intervention because my doctor, I kept saying to him, you know, he's not talking on time, things aren't happening. And my doctor would say, boys develop later than girls, you know, oh, well, you come from a family of late talkers, you know, so forth. But I just couldn't wait any longer, so I went to early intervention, and they tested my son, and they said to me, well, you know, you seem to be reading all the baby books, you know, first-time mother, what do you think it is? And I don't know where this came from to this day, I really don't know, and because I knew nothing. And I said to him, if you think this is autism, it's not. Now, imagine that you're that poor social worker who's working with me, a young mother, and I don't know, I'm not like that, by the way. But, you know, so to say, you know, but I think there was just something inside of me that was so elemental, just so scary about what was going on with my son at that time, that I was a little defensive, and I said, if you think this is autism, it's not. And they said, okay, all right. They were very nice to me, and they said, you know what, take this home and read it, and let us know what you think. And it was a piece of writing about autism, and it described a lot about my son. And all of a sudden, I could see him on the pages of this paper, and I knew what was happening at that point. And he was about 24 months old at the time. I'm really grateful that they did that. It must have been very, very difficult to do that. Imagine having a mother saying, you know, not going, oh, okay, and, you know, saying quite the opposite. But I'm so glad that they were there and that they had the courage to keep working with me. And so that's one of the reasons why I do what I do today, because I'm very, very grateful for the work that they did with us earlier. And what I can tell you is that, you know, there he is as a baby, you know, all the way through. He's had help every step of the way. We really tapped into our special education program. I've been a very strong advocate for my son, and I've been a strong advocate in my PAC as well. And so, and without, you've got to have a voice, you've got to speak up. It's great that you're here because this is what how our kids do succeed in life, and it's because of all your love, getting behind them as parents and doing what you do. And so my son, we didn't know, I mean, it wasn't until he's now 18, but it wasn't until a couple of years ago that he was actually taking the bus and taking the train and getting around. And now, last summer, he actually had an internship where we couldn't believe it. He had a job, and you know, all the things that we hope for our kids, but we just don't know if they're going to have them. And so he was able to take the train into work every day last summer. And what he got out of that experience was just light years upon what we could have ever seen even a year before. You just don't know. And so right now what we just found out, we kept pushing, and now we know he's going to be able to go to college. And we couldn't have seen that coming, and we couldn't have seen it coming when he was 3, and we couldn't have seen it at 6, and we might not have seen it at 9. We kept holding it out, though, as our hope, and we kept working toward that. And now, at this age, we know that he's going to be able to have that. Now, we also know he's a person with a disability, so what the future looks like is still unsure. But we're going to keep working at it, and I guess what I'm saying to all of you, just to kind of have you understand why I do this and what I'm about to tell you, is that it's really, really important. The earlier you start, it really makes a difference, and you can make a difference for your kids. And so I want to just say that to you right off the bat. I feel very fortunate. So, this is his first birthday party video of, you know, him. And does he look happy there? No, right? No. And we know that 1 in every 68 children will have an autism spectrum disorder. We just got that information from the CDC about 2 weeks ago. And, you know, and we can actually see signs in young children as early as their first birthday. Because think about this situation. If you have a disability that has a social piece to it, or communication piece to it, or sensory piece to it, you're not comfortable, right? So what happened here, the bright lights, lots of people in the room, everybody wanting his attention because he's the birthday boy, and I'm sure that hat with the silly string didn't help at all either. But you know what, he didn't look too happy in that picture. And if you go back and you look retrospectively, studies have been done on this, looking at first birthday videos, you might be able to see some of those early warning signs. Who knew, right? But it's there. So, so then thinking about autism right now and what we know about it and how it's growing. You know, we hear about prevalence and then it's increasing. So it's continuing to rise, and in the period from 2008 to 2010, it went up 30% in terms of what the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are starting to monitor and gather this data. And then we found out that, you know, the prevalence, it's a 1% of the population from birth to 22 will have an autism spectrum disorder. And, you know, we're looking at now, the number is, we believe, 1 in 68 people, you know, overall. And boys have autism spectrum disorders 5 times more than girls do. So it's 1 in 42 boys and 1 in every 189 girls. So girls are not, you know, free from this. Girls get autism too, and we have to know what to look for because it looks a little different in girls. We also know that in the country, the average age when a child is identified as having autism is 4 years old. Now, up until last year, you heard about autism spectrum disorders. You might have heard about something called PDD, pervasive developmental disorder, which is very much along the autism spectrum. It's very similar. And then we also heard about something called Asperger's syndrome. About a year ago, all of those categories went into one, so now they're all called autism spectrum disorder, okay? But they look a lot different, and what that means is that autism spectrum disorder just describes a lot of different things about behaviors or communication or other things, but it looks different in every single child on the spectrum. Some may talk, others may not. Some may, be able to learn very easily, others may not. And so some may have more social abilities than others. So it really truly depends. But what we do know is that depending on, in the past, the average age for autism was 4. For PDD was 4 years, 5 months. And for Asperger's syndrome, because those kids talk a lot, and that's called the little professor syndrome, they know a lot of facts about things, you didn't pick that up as quickly. 6 years old. So that's a lot. Talk about early intervention and needing early intervention. If you're not picking it up until 4, guess what? You missed the window for early intervention. Now you're in the school system, and it's not as family-centered, it's more child-centered. So it's a different model. And so it's really, really, really important that we identify our kids early so that they get all that great service from early intervention before they get into their school system. And the earlier you start, the better. So that's the thing. What do we do to address the needs of every 1 in 68? I call my son my little 1 in 68, right? But it's early intervention is the answer, or the earliest possible intervention is the answer. And we know this because it works. There's research that's been done on this, and there's support for behavioral intervention in young children, and particularly with autism spectrum disorders, and a whole host of other interventions as well. Speech therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral therapy, play therapy, music therapy, all of these things work. And so there's a lot of research behind this, and that's another good reason to do it. So then I was telling you that I'm part of this national campaign from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention called Learn the Signs, Act Early. So I want to talk right now about typical developmental milestones, and then we're going to talk about, well, what about when there's a concern, and then what about if you think it's autism, and then what about if you think somebody else's kid has autism, and then about some materials that we have that can help families. So, developmental milestones, right? There's a brochure. I'll show you more about it over, and you can pick it up on the way out. But it's called "Track Your Child's Developmental Milestones," and it really, all the things that kids are supposed to be doing. Development? What does it mean to develop? And when does it happen? And what does the difference look like between somebody who's 6 months old and 12 months old and 18 months old? And how do they develop? So these are things that most kids can do by a certain age, and it's when a child plays, how a child learns, when a child starts to speak, how they act, how they move. And these are important clues about your own child's development. If you know what typical development looks like, then you can then say, okay, I think we're doing these things on time, but then you'll also know when it's not happening on time. And that's kind of what happened with me. So, the CDC has me throw up this slide here, and they say looking for milestones is easy, fun, and really important. I go for the really important part, okay? It's really important. And if you track them over time, it really does help you understand your child and know what to expect. It is in some ways, we love our kids and we celebrate our kids and what they're doing, their milestones. So in some respects, it's a wonderful thing, and it is kind of fun in that way. But you just want to make sure that your child is developing well for their age, and it does provide you with important information to share with your doctor whenever you have the checkup. So this little sheet that I'll show you as well in a minute, you can take it to the doctor and say, yeah, my child's doing this, 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 and this, but you know what, I'm not checking off on these other categories. And then see what the doctor has to say. So, it helps you to catch signs of developmental problems early by tracking these milestones. And then what about if you have a concern? Then what? So yes, we want to think about tracking milestones. That's where we want everybody to be. But then once we start tracking those milestones and you see something that doesn't look right, what are you going to do about it? So, first of all, let's just think about what some of those things, what are some of the red flags if a child has a developmental concern? One thing might be, by 6 months old, we would expect a child to have big smiles, warm, joyous expressions by 6 months old. I'm happy to see you, happy to see your family. And then there might not be, and by the way, autism or some of these developmental concerns are not sometimes they are behaviors, but sometimes they're the absence of behaviors, the lack of behaviors, not seeing things, all right? Not seeing back and forth sounds and smiles and facial expressions by 9 months, or no babbling by 12 months, or no back and forth gestures like pointing to show you something or sharing something with you or reaching or waving bye-bye by 12 months old, or no words by 16 months old, and no two-word meaningful phrases. And when I say meaningful phrases, that's a really important part of that, because some kids, let's say they have Asperger's syndrome, or what we used to call Asperger's syndrome, would know, let's say that they'd know lots and lots of words, but they might not put the words together in a way that had a lot of meaning. They might tell you every car, make and model, because that's something they're really interested in. But if you ask them to give you a meaningful sentence, it might not happen. So just little things like that. So it has to be meaningful by 24 months. And then here's the clincher right here, is that any loss of speech or babbling or social skills at any age, these are red flags of concern. These are things to go and talk to your doctor about. Okay? So, 3 things are the cornerstone of healthy development. Something called joint attention. So I'm going to tell you what that is. Joint attention is that if a baby wants a Cheerio, okay, something to eat, and he might look at it, he'll look up at you, and he'll look back at it. He's not saying anything, but he's trying to get your attention. And the way he gets your attention is by looking down, looking at you, looking back, and that's nonverbal communication. It's going back and forth. You want to see that in young children. Or if a child pulls you in and points at something to show you, because they want to see your attention, or they want to see what your reaction is to something. That's joint attention. You're looking for that kind of back and forth. You're looking for language, as I said, that's purposeful, that the language is saying, I want something, or I need something, or mommy, look, but not, Mazda 626, 2000 model, I mean, something more purposeful than that. And then you want to see pretend play. You want to see children really pretending, using dolls and phones and trucks and all of that in a meaningful way. My guy, what he would do, he was a big Thomas the Tank Engine fan, okay? And then a lot of kids on the spectrum, for whatever reason, like Thomas the Tank Engine. I don't know why, but they do. And so what he would do, though, is he wouldn't be playing with them on the track. He would line them up. And he'd look at them, But there's nothing purposeful about that play. There's nothing pretend about that play. It's just lining things up for the sake of lining things up. So again, you're looking at what kind of play. What does it look like? Does it look like fun pretend play? Well, let's hope. Okay. Now, then we're going to get into some of the warning sign areas. So there are things that are called stereotypic behaviors. That just means the kind of behaviors that you would see based on a particular disability. But things like eye contact are really important. Now, that's not true for every culture, so I want to be really clear about that. Some cultures, you're not supposed to look an adult in the eye, so the child may not have anything that looks like autism if that's part of their culture, so just remember that. But they might get stuck on things. They don't like change. They like sameness. They might tantrum because they have difficulty maybe expressing themselves, and so they get frustrated and they tantrum more easily because of their difficulties with communication. They may have odd hand and finger mannerisms. You might see kids looking at their fingers or walking on their toes, flapping. You might see them, as I talked about, lining up toys and objects, but not in a way that's playful, and maybe a little bit obsessively. Or children spinning things just to see something spin a wheel on a car, but not, play with the car. Banging or their head rocking, and again, lacking the ability to play with toys, or maybe preferring to be alone, maybe really not wanting to be with other people. And we ran into a lot of this with my son when he was a young guy. Then the sensory things, okay? So we think about all of us, sometimes we don't like the cold, we don't like the heat, but for kids with autism spectrum disorders, it's really bothersome. And so things like they may not like touch, certain sounds, certain tastes. You might find that they're very finicky about what they eat. Might be a certain color food, or their sights, or how their mannerisms. They may get very stimulated by certain activities. But they may have difficulty processing their sensory environment. So for example, when my son was a little guy, he didn't want to go out in the sun when it was bright outside. So I had to always take him out when it was shady. We had to put a hat on him. And you could just see how bothered he was by that. And that was a sensory thing. Or he didn't like a lot of loud noise in his environment. You'd find that he would start to get a little bit tantrumy in those situations. And then there's things like physiological, meaning your body, your head circumference. A child, they may have a larger head circumference. They may lose some of their skills. They may have low muscle tone, not a lot of, firm muscle. They may have a lot of ear infections. I hear that a lot. My guy had a lot of ear infections. They may have trouble with sleeping, and then you have trouble with sleeping. They may have a lot of gastrointestinal issues, things like diarrhea, constipation, a lot of things about their eating. They may be a picky eater, as I mentioned earlier. They may have seizures at a certain time in their life. I think that happens usually with older children, but that may happen younger too. And then they may have other disorders that at the same time as their autism, they may have other things too. So these things may not always be just on their own, there may be more to it. And then there are other things to think about, such as if you have a younger sibling, you've got a child with an autism spectrum disorder and you've got a younger brother or sister, well, it's good to make sure that those children, that you're really watching how they're developing, doing, tracking the milestones, doing all the things for those siblings, because autism runs in families. And so I will tell you, I have a niece who has Asperger's syndrome, And then we were told in my family that, we came from a family of late talkers. My father talked late, my brothers talked late. So there are things that does run in families. So what do you do? Okay, so let's say that this is your situation. Talk to your pediatrician. Go to your pediatrician. And don't wait. Don't wait for the next appointment. Don't wait. Go if you have a concern. And you should always go to your pediatrician whenever you have a concern of any sort for a child. But when you go, it's really good to be prepared. So how would you be prepared? You might write a few things down that you're observing. You might look at this little pamphlet and take it on the way out and then bring it with you and say, as part of your preparation, check off the things that are working. And then, say, well, these are going right, but you know what, I noticed that these things might not be happening at this stage. Let's talk about it. And the doctor will be more than happy to talk to you about it. And then a tool like this can also help you express your concerns clearly, because it's all right here. But also, I think writing things down or talking to somebody before you go and say, what do you notice? This is what I noticed, and then make that list and bring it with you. And then when you're with the doctor, ask questions. And if there's something you don't understand, ask the doctor to explain it. It's really okay, if there's something, lots of doctors, they forget that they're getting caught up in all this medical terminology, and you might not understand it. I know there's plenty of times where I'll say, can you tell me what that means? So do. You have the permission. You just go ahead and do it. And then follow up. If you don't hear back from them, don't wait. You get in touch, because it's the most important thing you can do for your child. So follow up, follow up, follow up. Is everything good? What do I need to do, doctor? What else? And they can tell you. Now, sometimes I get this question a lot from people. What if it's not my child? But what if I know somebody else who has a child and I'm worried about them? And I don't know, as a friend or as a family member, what to say. So what you want to do is you want to listen first, talk to the parent, but first listen to the parent and start with their observations or concerns. So a question that you might ask a friend is, how's your child doing? How's everything going? And then just sit back and listen to what they have to say. But you want to take the parent's perspective first and let them tell you before you offer any of your observations. And then always be supportive and never judgmental, because, I'm sure you're all here at the PAC for a reason. I'm sure all of us have our family members, and we always want people to support us and not judge us, especially when it comes to disability. Avoid any kind of jargon, ASD, PDD, ADHD, call it autism or call it, developmental concerns, but it's really, and that can be scary too, so I would even avoid those things. I just say, if you're concerned about his development, maybe you should talk to the pediatrician, and then keep it positive, because whenever we go to a pediatrician, what we're trying to do is rule it out. Is it or isn't it? If it isn't, I want to know right away so that we can get on with our life and do other things. If it is, I want to treat it right away so that life gets better for everybody. And then, if you know, as a friend, of a place to send a family member for more help or things that they could read, do it. That's a great thing to do. As I mentioned before, you know, I was the parent that said, if you think this is autism, it's not, and they handed me something to read, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm thinking it's autism. You know, so, you know, if you can give somebody something to read or they can help them, it's great. And then, you know, always talk to other people about the importance that we do know that identifying what works early is best, and then really be there to help work through emotions with your friend or family member. And don't dismiss their concerns, because if they've come to you and they've said, you know, I'm worried about my child, parents' intuition is huge. It is spot on. It is so right. The other thing is, don't compare one child to another. Every child is different. Every child is going to develop different. Each kid is unique. So, you know, think about it yourself. If someone said, well, you know, my child is doing blah, 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 and, you know, you can't relate to that. So keep it down to focus on that child that you're concerned about. Don't use labels, as I mentioned before. Don't scare people. Really keep it positive, because it is positive. Whatever it is, if you're ruling it in or you're ruling it out, guess what? It's positive. You rule it out, you don't have a worry. If you rule it in, life is going to get better, because you're going to have people helping you. And then don't overwhelm with too much information if possible. So, you know, then to confirm the suspicion, we want doctors to screen at these well visits, by the way. This is one thing I didn't say. At 18 and 24 months, a doctor should be running a screening tool on your child. And actually, they should be doing developmental screening at every well visit, but autism screening at 18 and 24 months. And so ask for it if it's not happening. Hey, are you doing an autism screen on him? I want to know how he's doing. You know, but let's say that the screen does show a concern, and so the doctor says to you, you know, I think we want to check it out. I think we want to go and get a full evaluation. So who can do that? Who can make, and the evaluation would lead to a diagnosis. So who can do that? A child neurologist can do it, pediatric neurologist, a developmental behavioral pediatrician can do it, and then for older children, a child psychiatrist or a child psychologist can do it. And those are the four. Those are the people that can diagnose. And those are the people who should diagnose, not your community pediatrician. Okay, so that's all the information I have about just the developmental piece. But then, you know, here I am, and one of the things that we want to do is we have a state chapter. I've got about 40 to 60 people working across organizations in the state of Massachusetts to try to make things better for families by getting this information out and coming up with a few things that we can do for that purpose. So, first thing that we're doing is outreach, and tonight is outreach. I'm reaching out to you, I'm sharing information with you, and we have materials that you can take with you. And so one of the things that we're doing is for the Act Early campaign in Massachusetts, I'm what's called an ambassador. So an ambassador is somebody who goes, meets people, says hello, and tells you a few things, and hopefully, you know, makes connections as well. And so I do that. I'm one of 25 in the country, and I do that here in Massachusetts. We also have a website online, and the web address will be up shortly. And then sometimes I go to conferences and I have an exhibit table and I talk to families there. Or we do parent outreach to doctors who don't really know a lot about screening sometimes, or do, but need a little more information, or educators. Anyone working with young children, we want them to know about what healthy development looks like, and when there's a problem, what to do about it. So again, that team of people that I have working with me across all these organizations, some of them are early intervention agencies, some of them are school systems, some of them are doctors' offices. We're all working together on outreach. And so this little brochure, as I mentioned before, is one way that we can do that, to get this is in English and Spanish, and we get this into the hands of families. And because we have people working in other parts of the country on this, some of these materials are being translated into other languages as well. And then there's another booklet that's online. When you see our website, all of the materials I'm going to tell you about tonight, you can get free, and they're online. So this is fully expanded book. Have you ever heard of What to Expect When You're Expecting, and What to Expect the First Year, and all those books? Well, this is a free version of something like that that tracks development, and it's a booklet, so you can, you know, print it out and check things off and write things down. It's called Milestones, Moments, and it's great. And it's based on every single well visit age, what's supposed to be happening at each one of those times. And then they've got this great book. You can order these through the CDC's website, and they will ship it to you for free. And it's called, and you'll get it in packs of 5. So it's called Amazing Me. It's a children's book. And it's something that a parent can read to their child at the age of 3, and while they're reading a fairy tale story about, you know, a little bunny rabbit and what's happening, or kangaroo and what's going on in that kangaroo's life at the age of 3, they're learning about healthy development for their own child at the age of 3 too. So it's a great tool for families to learn. And then online on our website too, we've got these photo novellas about development and what to do when development is not working the way it should, in English and Spanish, called It's Better to Know. And it's a story, it's like a graphic novel kind of, you know, like a comic book. It has pictures of, you know, a dialogue that's happening from one family member to another, and the grandmother who's really telling the family what to do, how this all works, and that they really need to see their doctor, and, you know, trying to help them think about tracking development. So it's a great book for families. And we have all sorts of other materials. I've got some of them on the table over there, but a fact sheet we have online, a milestone moments card we have on the table, for people that are working with young families, tips on how to speak with families, and a lot of the things are available in different languages. And we're still working on getting more all the time. We have a website. So this is the website address. It's www.ma for Massachusetts, actearly.org. So Massachusetts Act Early, actearly.org. And a lot of the materials, as I mentioned, are free and downloadable on the Massachusetts website. And there's also links that you can go to the CDC's national website if you want. And we have a Facebook page as well. So it's www.facebook.com/massactearly, and I'll put things out on that Facebook page every now and then. And then we're training people. So who are we training? We're training doctors on the importance of screening, on what the early warning signs look like, on you know, how to share concerns with the family, how early intervention works, how education should work. We're training nurses. We're training physician assistants. So all of these people that are working with young families and young children, elementary educators, parents, people that are first responders, so that everybody's got a clue. The more people that know about this, the more that we can support our children. And there's a whole curriculum, as I mentioned, that does that, that the CDC has. This is mostly for pediatricians, but it's a really good thing. And so we're trying to get hospitals to train all their people on how, on this various curriculum. And then we have early identification. We're trying to shorten the wait times that it takes for a child to get to a diagnosis. You know, because right now it takes an awfully long time sometimes, like 6 months to a year, depending. So we have this one doctor on our state team who's fantastic. She's been working in Lowell and in North Chelmsford and in New Bedford and Lynn and a variety of different places. And what she's trying to do is to create what she calls a fast track, a pipeline from the pediatrician seeing that there might be, you know, screening and all. And then when the pediatrician does see that problem, then having a direct relationship with two people, the local early intervention office or their school system, and also with the developmental behavioral pediatrician who can do the diagnosis. So she's trying to test this out, see how it works, and then what she can learn about this, she's going to share with other doctors so they can try that in their practices too. So this is her algorithm, is what she calls it, but it's like a flow chart that says, you know, this is how we're going to go. You know, we're going to screen here. We're going to, you know, have a person here that's, you know, appointed to do a follow-up and so forth. But it's just how she thinks about it and how she can make it faster to really whittle down that waiting time from a year or 6 months to a much shorter time period. Yes, we got to, okay. I'm going to wrap this up real quick. I'll tell you about 2 last projects and then we're done. So the first, this is something that I'm working on right now. I'm trying to create a training program for doctors on how to be what's called culturally competent in their screening practice. And that means if you're working with people who do not speak English as their first language, how do you do that in the best possible way, respectfully, for families? So we're working on that, and hopefully it will be done at the end of this year. And then we also have another project in the state where we're actually mapping out autism and looking at how are people being served, how many people are being identified, how many people are being diagnosed, when is it happening, and all of the various services straight through to transition. And that's really it. I mean, that's all the work that we're doing, and that's my son saying, you know, thank you to you. But, you know, but I guess I wanted to just say to you that first I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to let you know that what you're doing for your kids, despite the fact that you're here, they are so lucky to have you, and they're going to benefit.